5 of the most terrible maniacs and murderers in the history of mankind. Jeffrey Dahmer was born into an ordinary American family. Mother was a housewife, father doctor of philosophy. The parents often quarreled. The mother underwent psychiatric treatment. The child grew up withdrawn. He was involved in tennis and the school newspaper, and played the clarinet in the orchestra. At the same time, he was collecting a strange collection of body parts of dead animals. He kept them at home in formaldehyde, and in the area behind the house, he set up a real pet cemetery. At 13, he realized his homosexuality. He committed his first murder at 18. The trigger was the divorce of his parents, a lack of attention on their part. Then Dahmer invited home young Stephen Hicks, who was hitchhiking. He got him drunk, stunned him with dumbbells, and dismembered him. Dahmer kept the head in the refrigerator and scattered the remaining parts in the deep forest. Subsequently, Jeffrey met his victims, minorities, in bars. The maniac lured them home and abused them in every possible way. He strangled them, raped them even posthumously, and performed a lobotomy. Police arrested Dahmer in 1991. Over the course of 13 years, he killed 17 men and boys, some of whom he ate after killing them. He was repeatedly charged with indecent behavior and drunkenness. Neighbors complained of a strange smell from the apartment, but the police did not seriously deal with it. The murder trial became the most expensive trial in the history of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a precedent for not mitigating a sentence when the defense insists on the defendant's insanity. Dahmer was sentenced to life, but 3 years later in prison, he was beaten to death by another prisoner. Jeffrey is one of the worst criminals in the United States. His revelations about the motives of the crimes and interviews with his parents can be read in the book My Name is Jeffrey Dahmer, The True Story of a Serial Killer by Mickey Knox. How did the monster grow from a simple, quiet guy? What was found during a search in Dahmer's apartment after his arrest? Why didn't the police take a closer look at the rowdy before? Biographer Brian Masters tried to answer these and many other questions in his book, The Author of Death, the story of the cannibal maniac Jeffrey Dahmer. David Berkowitz, the real name of the killer who fired a .44 caliber revolver at people secluded in their cars, is Richard David Falco. The world knows him as the son of Sam. Confused about names? Now you will understand everything. Richard was born into the family of Betty Broder and Tony Falco, but the latter was a stepfather. Betty cheated on her husband with a married man who demanded that his mistress get rid of the child. That's why Jews Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz raised the baby. The family was good, but everything went wrong after the untimely death of their adoptive mother. Nathan remarried, but David did not accept it. He became interested in arson, joined the army, contracted gonorrhea, converted to Christianity, and found his real mother. But close relationships didn't work out for him, and he lashed out at strangers. In addition to loving couples, he shot at girlfriends. Biographer Mickey Knox, who wrote the true crime story of the maniac Dahmer and about Berkowitz, collected all the known materials in the fascinating documentary Son of Sam, the story of America's most dangerous serial killer. Find out where this strange nickname came from, how profilers caught him, why he decided to help the FBI, and much more. Ted Bundy. Theodore Bundy was, without a doubt, one of the most dangerous and feared serial criminals, and a superstar among his fellow villains. He admitted to committing 36 murders, but the police are sure there were many more victims. The impressive and well-mannered Bundy met women in public places. He pretended to be lame and in need of help, or even put on the uniform of a servant of the law. So he lured the girls into the car and attacked. In other cases, he entered the victims' homes. Bundy sawed off the heads of 12 victims and beat and strangled others. What is the reason for such rage and anger? We learn from the book The Killer Beside Me. My friend is the serial maniac Ted Bundy by and rule. The author succumbed to Bundy's charisma. For many years she visited him in prison and supported him. From this conversation was born a documentary thriller that Time magazine dubbed the best true crime of all time. As Rule writes, Bundy was raised by his grandparents as their own son. After all, he was born out of wedlock, and his father's name was hidden. Ted could not forgive this lie and became embittered. The only authority among his family was his cruel and tyrannical grandfather. Bundy enjoyed enormous success with women, studied Chinese, psychology and law, worked for then-Governor Washington Evans. He could achieve heights, but he chose the path of a serial maniac and murderer. It is not known exactly when he started killing, either at the age of 14 or at 27. He traveled around different states from Washington to Utah, committing atrocities. One day he was stopped by the highway patrol. During a search of the car, they found a mask made of tights, an ice pick, handcuffs, ropes, and garbage bags. But Bundy managed to convince the guards that these were household items and did not pose any danger. He was first arrested in 1975, but managed to escape twice. 250 journalists were pressed at his trials, stories about the terrible murders of which, according to investigators, there may be more than 100 thundered throughout the world. But it is surprising that Bundy's fans did not decrease. One of them gave birth to a daughter from him when he was already in prison. Theodore was executed by electric chair. He was 42 years old. In 2018, a film about Bundy's life, The Beautiful, the Bad and the Ugly, starring Zac Efron, was released.
Dennis Nielsen. Nielsen is the most famous English serial killer after Jack the Ripper. He hunted for young gay men, brought them to him, tortured and dismembered them. He threw the remains into the sewer, which allowed him to be caught. He acquired his butcher skills while serving in the army as a cook. The investigation assumed that the serial killer had more than 20 victims, but they managed to prove 6. Nielsen himself attributed 15 to himself. Dennis grew up as a calm child and did not show aggression towards people or animals, but he suffered a traumatic experience as a child. When he was 6, he spent several hours with the body of his deceased grandfather. At 8 years old, the child nearly drowned and was then sexually abused by his savior. These 2 events, according to the criminal, led to his emotional death. He committed his first murder on December 31, 1978. The motive was the fear of being alone. The victim was only 14. Nielsen strangled the boy with a tie and then drowned him in a bucket. The next murder occurred a year later. Then the intervals became shorter. He mainly attacked homeless people, drunks and drug addicts, who were easily lured by warmth and the promise of dinner and drinks. He was arrested after his neighbor's drain became clogged. Workers found human remains in the sewer. Nielsen spent 35 years in prison and spent many years fighting for the rights of prisoners. But this was a dubious activity. He ensured that prisoners were allowed to receive erotic packages by mail. Nielsen was even glad when he was caught. "I'll tell you everything. You have no idea how great it is to talk to someone about this," he said during interrogation. Brian Masters' book, Murder for Company, is based on the 50-volume diaries of a serial killer. These are frightening revelations of a monster in human form. After the murder, Saturday his unfortunate guests at the festive table and watched a TV show with them, just so as not to be left alone. The book was adapted into the TV series Death, starring Scott and David Tennant. Tony Coast. The 1960s in America is the era of free love, rampant drugs and hippies. The Jack the Ripper of this time was Tony Costa, real name Anthony Charles Costa. It's interesting that writer Kurt Vonnegut gave this nickname to the serial killer and maniac. His daughter Edith knew Tony, and Vonnegut corresponded with him. The point of his letters to me was that a person as eager to be virtuous as he was could not hurt a fly. He believed in it. Costa was tried on charges of 7 murders, but only 2 were proven. He began his atrocities at the age of 16, when he first penetrated a strange girl and watched her while she slept. The girl was rescued by her neighbors. At 18, he was first imprisoned for hooliganism, but was soon released on parole for good behavior. Then Costa got married, got a job as a carpenter, and had 3 children. At the same time, he worked as a babysitter and looked after the 2 daughters of a woman who worked with him in the same motel. Costa messed with Lisa Rotman and her younger sister, took them with him into the forest, where he buried murdered women with their hearts cut out. For Lisa, Tony was a friend then, but when she grew up and found out that he was committing bloody, brutal murders, the woman conducted her own investigation. partly to make sure what happened, partly to figure out how a monster could be hiding behind the mask of a charismatic guy. Rodman, in collaboration with Jennifer Jordan, wrote down everything she found out in the book, The Nanny. I was raised by a serial killer. It's even more scary to read this book because Lisa doesn't understand who is the greater evil here, the psychopath Costa or her mother, who, for the sake of personal affairs, left her daughters with someone unknown. Costa's connection to the murders of women was discovered in 1969. When he was 25 years old, he was imprisoned for life. He hanged himself in prison. Until recently, Costa insisted that his alter ego Carl was to blame for all the crimes.